ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. As the Trump administration aggressively dismantles DEI initiatives across higher education, less like a policy shift and more like a wrecking ball, many Americans interpret this as politically motivated, as a kind of act of bigotry, particularly anti-Black bigotry. And honestly, given the optics, it's easy to see why. But before we join the chorus of condemnation, we should distinguish the object of critique. The real issue is not diversity, equity, and inclusion as classically defined. The issue is critical social justice, which I will refer to as CSJ. This is a highly ideological framework that redefines those terms, diversity, equity, and inclusion, through the lens of systemic oppression and quasi-Marxist social analysis. CSJ sees the world less like a complex society and more like an oppressive hellscape, or at best a woke Netflix reboot of Les Mis. CSJ is a worldview constructed at the intersection of critical theory, postmodern skepticism, and identity politics. It interprets all human relationships through the lens of power: who has it, who doesn't have it, and who should be held accountable. It assumes not just that racism or sexism exists, but that they are everywhere and every time. Embedded in the language, institutions, laws, classrooms, and even the quiet moments between colleagues who didn't smile long enough in the hallway or didn't say Gesundheit quickly enough when a Black person sneezed. It casts institutions not as flawed but fixable, but as wholly rigged games of monopoly played by the privileged few. To be clear, the Trump administration's approach is neither surgical nor subtle. Using a sledgehammer to fix what requires a scalpel risks harming precisely those DEI programs abiding by the original meaning of affirmative action, which is prohibition of discrimination based on immutable characteristics and provision of resources regardless of those characteristics. Still, we cannot pretend that the current backlash against DEI is completely unprovoked. Something has changed. DEI no longer just means opportunity. It has become, in many institutions, a proxy for ideological conformity. Take, for instance, I have this. Take, for instance, the oft-cited quote by Robin DiAngelo. The question is not, did racism occur, but how did racism manifest in this situation? This statement is both bold and revealing. It presumes that racism is a permanent feature of any situation, not an empirical question to be investigated, but a metaphysical certainty to be uncovered. To question its existence is to reveal one's ignorance, or worse, one's complicity. So, if you can't find the racism in an innocuous interaction, you just need to look harder. This framing transforms racism from a discrete behavior to a kind of atmospheric condition. It's in the air. This tenet is where habeas corpus meets the Kafka trap, which is fallacious reasoning in which any response to an accusation is proof of the accusation's legitimacy. Sorry. Something like, I'm not racist, is exactly what a racist would say. And the adage, innocent until proven guilty, is now guilty until proven guilty. Such logic extends to concepts like disparate impact, which holds that any statistically significant disparity among groups is evidence of systemic bias. Alternative explanations, cultural, historical, individual, are rarely entertained. This monocausal thinking is attractive in its simplicity, but dangerous in its consequences. To be fair, evaluating institutions for possible bias is good practice in any pluralistic society. But CSJ flips the script. It flips the process. It begins with the conclusion and works backwards to the evidence. It's sophistic in nature, in that it exercises intellectual rigor insofar as it benefits the perceived downtrodden group. That's not analysis, that's not critical thinking. It's reverse engineering of moral outrage. A key feature of CSJ is called epistemic justice, the idea that knowledge itself is political and that dominant ways of knowing, logic, empiricism, falsifiability, they are inherently suspect. In its place, CSJ elevates perception narrative, especially when these perspectives come from individuals deemed marginalized. Narrative and lived experience can be powerful supplements to deliberative speech. They can serve as introductions or examples to well-reasoned theory. However, to rely on them as one's epistemological salience gives way to solipsism, especially when questioning someone's description of lived experience is considered a form of bullying. Scholars in my field of rhetoric and composition have written texts arguing that even fictional stories are epistemologically equal to well-reasoned and imperial work. What's more, not all lived experience is considered valid. Stories that do not feature victimhood do not count, even if told by a black man. I know from experience. Another key feature, intersectionality, as developed by Kimberly Crenshaw, originally served as a tool to examine overlapping forms of discrimination. It was a useful heuristic, but in today's activist academic discourse, it often morphs into a totalizing worldview. All experiences must be interpreted through a matrix of oppression. Identity becomes the prism through which all meaning is filtered, and knowledge is no longer evaluated. It's not evaluated by coherence, anyway, or evidence, but by who delivers it and how they feel about it. Let me explain this image. This is the cover of a book called Counterstory. It sings the praises of telling stories that counter what they consider the hegemonic narrative, right? And some of these are true stories. Some of these are composites of different situations made into a story, otherwise known as fiction. This is not the only book like this. What's more, you're not allowed to counter the counter story. That makes you a bad person. This creates what Shelby Still has called a victim-focused identity, a form of self-understanding rooted less in agency than in grievance. When people are taught to see themselves as perpetually oppressed, they are not empowered to act. They are trained to wait for allies, for interventions, for validation, for someone or something to come and save them. In tandem with this comes the rise of affective reasoning, affective with an A, the privileging of emotional response over analytical rigor. Disagreement is interpreted as harm. Discomfort is rebranded as trauma. This is not to say there is no place for emotion in intellectual work, but it is to say that emotion should not be the driving force of that work. A slip into subjectivity is all but inevitable. When emotion is overemphasized like this, students are no longer asked to grapple with difficult ideas, they are encouraged to report them. Entire bureaucracies exist to protect feelings rather than foster thought. Fortunately, those bureaucracies are being dismantled, but we're not out of the woods yet. As Greg Lukianoff and Jonathan Haidt warned in The Coddling of the American Mind, this emotional reasoning encourages cognitive distortions that inhibit both critical thinking and maturity. When everything is a trigger and every disagreement is an insult or an assault, we're not producing resilient, analytic, and inquiring citizens. We're producing ideological hypochondriacs. Let's now turn again to higher education, where CSJ has found fertile ground through initiatives labeled with everyone's favorite words: diversity, equity, and inclusion. While a number of DEI programs are well-intentioned, the kinds grounded in CSJ often become performance art with an oversized budget. And that's a polite way of putting it. Today, DEI programs rooted in social justice or critical social justice function less like inclusion efforts and more like ideological enforcement agencies. Mandatory diversity statements, loyalty pledges masquerading as job requirements, and the ever-growing number of diversity trainings are symptomatic of this drift. Fortunately, the tide is turning on these ideological symptoms, but the root of the problem, critical social justice, is still there. I agree with the theorist Yascha Mounk, who, riffing on Mark Twain, recently wrote, "Reports of the death of wokeness are highly exaggerated." Independent scholar Sarah Ahmed describes this phenomenon as institutional diversity devolving into bureaucratic virtue signaling. What I call optic rhetoric replaces results with rituals. Land acknowledgements, designated safe spaces, weaponized privilege walks. These may feel good, but they often do little to improve material conditions or intellectual exchange. More troubling is identity essentialism. The idea that people can be fully understood through a single axis of identity. Add to this what Olufemi Taiwo calls epistemic deference, and you have classrooms where social identity determines authority and criticism becomes a form of oppression. Being what Nicole Hannah-Jones has called politically black fits into this. Black people who describe themselves as such feel like they are the real black people. Those wanting to understand the black experience, as if there's just one, defer to them for authentic explanations. So what I have here is a tweet that was quickly deleted, but not quickly enough to get a screenshot, and Nicole Hannah-Jones, who calls herself Ida Bae Wells, takes it upon herself to say, there is a difference between being politically black and being racially black. I am not defending anyone, but we all know this and should stop pretending that we don't. I know you can read, it's small in the back, so I'm just reading out loud. And somebody asked a question that a lot of people were wondering. What does that mean? If you don't know, it ain't for you. Then why would you even post it? If the people, forget it. I'm not the only one that asked. I'm also a black person. Yes, I'm capable of seeing your avatar, and I will repeat, if you don't understand the difference between being born/designated a certain race and taking up a particular set of racial politics, I am not going to educate you here. This shift erodes academic freedom. I've personally been accused of perpetuating white supremacy by white people, for seeing the acquisition of standard English as a good thing and praising traits like individualism and self-reliance. Yes, you heard that correctly. In fact, I blocked out the title of this slide because I needed the words to be bigger. It says, aspects of whiteness in US culture. These are aspects of whiteness. This was on the Smithsonian's website for a bit until it was taken down because of too many complaints. Now you can see here, self-reliance is white. Individuality as primary unit, individual as primary unit, white. I'll move on for brevity. Let's see here. Hard work is the key to success. That idea is white. Work before play. Here's my favorite. Emphasis on scientific method. Objective, rational, linear thinking is white, and so is cause and effect relationships. So if I drop this, if I let go of it and it drops, I'm being white. Time, adherence to rigid time schedules, time viewed as a commodity. Future orientation, planning for the future. Delayed gratification. Progress is always best. Tomorrow will be better. Delayed gratification. There is a piece of chocolate right there in front of me. The reason why I didn't eat it, because I don't want to ruin dinner, that makes me white. We'll stop there. We don't have all the time in the world, but you get the point. Enlightenment values, long held as universal virtues, are now seen by some as ideological landmines. And for many, black people who embrace them might as well be white, and therefore guilty until proven guilty. Coercive compliance has become quite a phenomenon in academic and activist circles. The philosopher Elizabeth Anderson has warned against segregative egalitarianism, a model of equality achieved through separation rather than integration. This is separate but equal, that thing we thought we got past. We see this in racial affinity groups, segregated orientations, segregated graduations, and curriculum designs centered more on grievance than growth. Ironically, in the name of inclusion, institutions are reintroducing segregation, just with a better PR team. In hiring and promotion, ideological conformity is often a prerequisite. The Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, otherwise known as FIRE, has documented cases where faculty were penalized for questioning DEI orthodoxy. Diversity statements wouldn't be problematic if they too were allowed to be diverse. But in practice, they serve as purity tests. These are some books out there right now. Professors Speak Out is a book of stories about professors being ostracized for, well, asking questions, critical inquiry, right? Questioning somebody's lived experience, things like that. And Bad Education, Why Our Universities Are Broken and How We Can Fix Them, may come close to answering the question I've been hearing throughout the afternoon, what do we do about this? But frankly, it's not that convincing. Now, I like this book a lot, but I think there's more to be done about this. I'll talk about that later on. Now that CSJ proponents are facing political backlash, they decry censorship, unaware or unconcerned that they helped build the current architecture of suppression. In her recent essay, Free Speech Hypocrites, journalist Catherine Brodsky articulates a sentiment that I've been entertaining for weeks. After summarizing the attack on academic freedom, that is the collective sum of the Trump executive orders, she writes, "You see, my memory might not be so great, but it hasn't been so long that I've forgotten how professors were fired or quietly pushed out for their opinions, how students were hounded and harassed for theirs, how guest speakers on university campuses were shouted down or had their events canceled because university administrators preferred appeasement of the mobs over principle, or how simply defending free speech, once the hallmark of progressive academia, was recast as a right-wing tell, a reason for social exile. Critical social justice enthusiasts saw no issue when they were silencing others. After all, they're the good guys, right? They're the heroes. They're punching up. The crisis becomes even more absurd in writing instruction. In my field of rhetoric and composition, the anti-racist writing assessment ecologies movement argues that teaching standard English is inherently oppressive. According to this view, grammar is violence, and clarity is a tool of the oppressor. Audience consideration is not a major influence on communication, which is traditionally the case. Now, writing is about promoting the writer's or speaker's identity. I am fill in the blank, hear me roar. One prominent scholar advocates for labor-based grading contracts that emphasize effort over outcome. Yes, you get an A for effort. I'll let you read that. He tried really hard. I'm sure he, was the first one in class and the last one out. He may have failed all those classes, but he tried really hard. Effort matters, it does. I don't want to say it doesn't, but so does excellence. So does merit. They both suggest that holding students of various races to the same standards is a form of injustice. But as John McWhorter notes, proficiency in standard English is a gateway to professional opportunity. Demonizing its teaching under the guise of equity is not just misguided, it's cruel. This approach reinforces a caste system where elite students learn the language of power, while others are encouraged to not take it seriously because it is a form of oppression. The result is not liberation, it's linguistic segregation masquerading as compassion. So what do we do instead? I propose a return to classical liberalism, not as nostalgia, but as vision. Classical liberalism affirms universal dignity, free inquiry, equal opportunity, not in the one-size-fits-all way. It does not deny that structures matter, but it insists that individuals matter too. It encourages resilience, the philosophical kind, that allows us to withstand critique without crumbling. It promotes pluralism, not as demographic fact, but as an intellectual virtue. In pedagogy, this means upholding rigorous standards while ensuring all students have the tools to meet them. It means treating every student as a person capable of growth, not as a fragile representative of group grievance. It means fostering classrooms where disagreement is expected and respected. Oh, I don't want to do that one. Classical liberalism is social justice if done correctly. Period. Let's unpack that statement. Classical liberalism offers a framework for pursuing justice through liberty, equal rights, and open deliberation. It provides a means of pursuing justice. It is not social justice in the form of redistribution of equal outcomes. Ideally, it allows people to acquire the necessary skills and disposition to thrive in a free and pluralistic society. When grounded in individual dignity and equal opportunity, not one size fits all, classical liberalism aligns with the most enduring aims of citizen interaction and interdependence. It builds a rhetorical bridge and promotes cross-ideological dialogue. The truest form of social justice is one that respects individual liberty, personal responsibility, and the rule of law. That is classical liberalism. Frederick Douglass exemplified this very well. He didn't wait for permission. He demanded respect and earned it through resilience and excellence. He believed in reform, but also in the individual's capacity to rise. He grounded his fight against slavery not in group-based entitlement or collective guilt, but in what he saw as universal principles of liberty, natural rights, individual dignity, and self-reliance. Douglass endured conditions today's Black Americans cannot even imagine. Yet he understood that dignity requires an agency even he had. Otherwise, he would not have escaped slavery to become one of the most famous orators of the 19th century. He sought systemic reform, calling upon Americans to remember their Declaration of Independence and live up to the universal ideals of liberty and justice. Again, classical liberalism is social justice if done correctly. A modern-day example of this, although not as inspirational as Frederick Douglass, is Free Black Thought, a nonprofit organization I co-founded and I am also the president. Excuse me. Our mission is to spotlight the full range of Black intellectual perspectives, particularly those marginalized by dominant ideological narratives. Free Black Thought champions pluralism, merit, and individual agency, not as alternatives to racial justice, but as its necessary preconditions. We don't police speech or identity. We invite conversation and contestation, trusting that truth and justice emerge not from ideological conformity, but from civil discourse. In doing so, we embody a liberal approach to racial justice, one that affirms dignity without demanding deference. In practical terms, this means restoring intellectual standards. It means defending the right to offend. It means supporting students not by lowering expectations, but by equipping them to meet them. So critical social justice, well, it offers a compelling narrative, doesn't it? It provides clarity in a complex world. It offers community to those who feel isolated. In reality, it is a framework that ultimately collapses on its own contradictions. It demands inclusion while excluding dissent. It elevates emotion while discounting evidence. It replaces empowerment with paternalism. This isn't education, it's indoctrination. Yes, DEI needs reform, but the solution is not the culture wars version of a call-out thread. It may not be the executive actions, the preferred tool of the Trump administration. It's a recommitment to intellectual seriousness, educational equity, and moral courage. We don't need more slogans. We need institutions that teach students how to think, not what to think. That is becoming a cliche for a good reason. We need institutions that prepare students for challenge, not protect them from it. That treat language as a bridge, not a battleground. That's not just a critique of CSJ, it's an invitation to do better, to expect more, and to build institutions that empower people, not just to express their identities, but perhaps to transcend their identities. If we do these things well, we may find that we don't need DEI at all. We'll have something better, a culture that lives the values it claims to teach. Classical liberalism is social justice if done correctly. I'm done.